Hey everybody, welcome, and it's Nova here. We are going to be here today talking about a generalized guide for Frostpunk 2 because there are many new concepts and aspects in this game that differ very strongly from the first game. So we're going to get started. So the first thing that happens is you've got your city here. In order to do anything, you need to frostbreak the ground. An area must be cleared by frostbreaking in order to build any structures. You do, however, start with some area already frost-broken, as you can see with this dark grayish area. You can start building here already. But for the vast majority of other construction, you will need to clear out the area. You can do 8 tiles at a time, and they must be adjacent in some manner. Like so. It takes workforce and heat stamps to do this. If you take a look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see what your workforce number is. This is how many people in your city are able to work. And then your heat stamp supply. You do start with a bunch, but you will have to resolve that issue later, and we will get to it. And then once you do frostbreaking procedures, you can build districts. Districts take up 6 hexes of space, and much like the frostbreaking, they have to be adjacent to each other. However, if you see here, you can see that because we're sheltered from the wind, we can reduce our heat demand. We'll get into heat demand later. All districts can be expanded to hold 3 additional tiles each. Housing districts, however, can be expanded twice for a total of 12. This can help condense your population and make it easier to manage the housing problem. When you expand a district, it will increase its output, and also creates the ability to add buildings, which are special bonuses that you can have. So we'll show the expansion here. It does take heat stamps and prefabs to expand a district. And you must place the expansion adjacent to the district. It doesn't have to be a kind of a square or a cube like how I'm doing it. You can like make zigzags and stuff with your districts. So the shape it does not have to be uniform. And so now we're going to make an extraction district on this coal because we need heat. We're going to talk about heat as we get further along. Alright, and one thing I will want to make a note of is depending on what kind of districts you've made, you need to be careful about putting them near each other. I'm going to give you guys a few examples. So you see the industrial district here. If you look here, if you hover over this blue area, you'll see this symbol. That means if you put the industrial district too close to your housing district, it will increase squalor. Which, you know, bad living conditions. Nobody wants to live near a bunch of heavy machinery. If you put it too close to housing, you increase your squalor. If you put industrial districts or extraction districts near your food sources, that will increase disease. Which is self-explanatory. That's how fast people get sick. However, in any case, you'll also notice that it reduces your heat demand if you cluster your districts together. So it's highly advisable to cluster your districts as much as possible. Like your housing districts, you can have all clumped together and that kind of traps the heat. Makes it a little easier to manage your heat demand. Alright, so the next topic we are going to cover is resource management and interdependence. This is highly exaggerated in this game compared to Frostpunk 1. So first off, I mentioned heat stamps before when it came to frostbreaking. This is generated over time per week by your city's population. These are required for literally everything, from frostbreaking to district construction and expansion to research. So it's vitally important that you bolster your supply of this. Production of heat stamps can be hampered by a few different things. Certain in-game events, laws, also unmet demand for goods. And your goods supply and demand balance is measured up here in the upper middle right area. You can see we're at a deficit there, so that's affecting our heat stamp production. You also need prefabs, which is a resource right here directly next to heat stamps. This is used for all districts, buildings, and expansions, so of course it's very important that you have a lot of these. You generate these by your industrial districts, extraction districts, or when you start scouting in Frostland, you can get them from there. And you've also got your materials supply, which is up here next to goods. You need these to create prefabs or goods in your industrial districts. However, you also need enough of a supply to mitigate Squalor, because Squalor is basically a measure of how well kept up the city is. You know, things breaking down, you need to replace things occasionally, that kind of stuff. Alright, so the next thing we are going to cover is what I call HDCSC, or Hunger, Disease, Cold, Squalor, and Crime, which is this upper middle region here. You have 5 different factors that affect your city's population and are affected by your city's population and current state. So hunger is pretty self-explanatory. This is affected by your food supply or your food deficit. If you have a problem with food, as you can see here, it increases your disease burden, increases tension, and reduces the growth of your population. The vast majority of these things affect population growth in some capacity, some more than others. Hunger rises when there's not enough food to satisfy the demand. And then you've got your disease, which is, pretty self-explanatory, that increases the number of people who are absent from work due to being ill. This also increases tension and is affected by cold as well. And you've got cold over here. And you've got cold. This gradually increases disease, tension, decreases population growth, and may make people freeze to death. So, and there's an important note here. Even if you have enough housing for everyone, if your cold is too high, people will still die from the cold. This is a stark contrast to Frostpunk 1, where even if you have the worst heating, if you've got enough housing, people just become amputees and they never die. So that's a very important difference. I learned that the hard way. You must satisfy your heat demand to mitigate this, and we will get to heat demand in the next segments. And then cold rises when heat and shelter demands are both unfulfilled, so it's very important that you keep track of both. And then I mentioned Squalor briefly before. This also increases disease and tension, reduces population growth, but it also gradually damages your districts, ultimately causing them to stop functioning until they are repaired. And like I mentioned, if you don't have enough materials to satisfy the demand for the maintenance of the city, your Squalor will increase. Your Squalor can also increase from certain buildings that are researched and constructed, so you'll want to be careful of that and mitigate it accordingly. Then you've got crime. This gradually increases tension. It may also cause deaths or injuries in the city, or drive citizens to join factions. If your goods supply is at a deficit, this is when crime starts to go up. You can mitigate crime by doing things like watchtowers and prisons. Alright, the next topic we are going to cover is heat demand and generator management. So you've got your generator here in the middle of the city. And you can see what's going on here with your fuel mix and your output. You can see how much heat you are outputting based on your input. Your initial source is coal, much like the first game. Later on, this progresses to be either oil only or a combination of coal, oil, and steam. We will get to that a little bit more in the exploration segment. If you're in a heat demand deficit, like I mentioned in the previous segment, your cold will start to rise, and that will cause people to start dying from the cold. So you really need to be careful about this. Depending on the deficit's severity, the likelihood can either increase or decrease. And like I mentioned in the segment with the districts, you can mitigate some of the heat demand by clustering your districts together. So that can be a really important method to reduce your heat demand. And much like in the previous game, overdrive does exist, but similar to the first game, you'll want to be careful about when you use this, because your generator can become severely damaged or blow up, much like the first game. Colder temperatures overall increase your heat demand. So if you look up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the weather timeline, much like there is in the first game. And you can see, the warmer seasons, the colder seasons, and you'll see another symbol with a cloud and a lightning bolt that's called the whiteout. The whiteout dramatically increases your coal demand, and I mean dramatically with a capital D. It's very, very easy to fall into a cold deficit and result in cold deaths. So you'll want to bolster your energy production before this hits. And you'll know it's coming because of that symbol. Alright, in this segment we are going to be discussing population growth and the workforce in the city. So if you take a look in the upper left-hand corner, like I mentioned before, in a previous segment, you can see your current population, and how fast it's growing, and what factors are influencing it, if any. And then you can look at your workforce, and you can see what percentage of the population is currently able to work in some capacity. This is a limited number, as you can see. By default, it starts at 60%. You can bolster that percentage in a couple different ways. You can enact laws such as family apprenticeship, dutiful youth, and communal parenthood. You can also get it through faction devotion bonuses. We will get to factions and devotion and relations in a future segment. And factors such as hunger, disease, cold, squalor, basically everything, it can hinder your population growth. And your workforce can actually be moved around. So if you look here at this bar, you can see you can scale it between 0 and 100 in increments of 20. This decreases its output. However, it also decreases the demands to run it. You can even turn it off completely. This can be helpful if you need to move around your workforce to other districts because your city population is smaller, or a lot of people are sick, or if you need people for Frostbreaking. That's a good way to do it, is you can move them around from your districts. Alright, the next topic we are going to cover is laws, the council, and research. So, much like in the first game, you've got your research. In this game, it's referred to as the idea tree. Although it functions basically the same as the workshops did in Frostpunk 1. And you've got your different categories. You've got heating, resources, Frostland, city, society, and hubs. And these can be explored and researched and all that. Initially, though, your first objective is to research a solution to the coal mine crisis, and you can either pick the dust coal mine or the extra blasting coal mine. You'll notice that there are symbols here. This represents the factions that support or agree with the ideas. And you can see this for anything that you can research. Sometimes no one else may share the idea, other than the faction that it specifies here. And you can see, little flavor text here. And you can see what the building or what have you requires. In this case, for the dust coal mine, it requires 400 additional workforce on top of the baseline requirement. It also results in 150 coal output. However, your disease will slightly increase with the number of these buildings that there are. The more that there are, the higher your disease gets. And you can also see your demand for materials or other resources as well. You can also see how many heat stamps it'll take, how many prefabs to build, and how long it will take to research. If you have more of the research institutes in your housing districts, you will research quicker, much like with the workshops in the first game. And a lot of these things can mitigate societal problems. So we're going to go ahead and do the dust coal mine. And the next thing we're going to look at is the council. So initially, your first vote is called the vote of confidence. Basically, do the people still want you as their leader? Now, because it's the very first vote, it passes. But otherwise, normally, for general council laws, so under survival city or society, you need at least 51 votes to pass them. If you go under the rule laws category, you need a 2/3 majority, or 67 plus. However, they grant you, as the steward, the player, greater power, and they can also unlock other abilities. We will get to those later. So we're going to take a look here. You start off with a few already, but you can also get other picks from events in the game or from research to unlock a lot of these other options. Thankfully, you do start with a few, though, so then you can start looking and seeing what you want to do. So if we start with goods, off the bat here, we can see that there are two possible choices. Only one of these can be active at a time. You can switch between them, though, if you want to pass the other one. So with this example, in durable goods, we can see that goods demand per capita will decrease a little bit. Or if we do mass-produced goods, we can increase the efficiency at which goods are produced. This can help mitigate squalor and crime, both of these. So really, it's your choice. Some of them come with downsides, certain laws. As you get further along in the game, you'll get to see those. You can then propose it, and you can go straight to a vote. You can see how many of the delegates, there are 100 of them, are for the law, are hesitant, or against it. You could go straight to a vote, or you could go here to negotiate. And depending on the group, some of them may be open to negotiate. Some of them won't, for one reason or another. The two most common reasons that a group will not negotiate with you is either they want it, or it is against their worldview. And we'll get to the worldviews when we get to the segment on the factions. So we'll go ahead and just negotiate with the Frostlanders, and we can ask them to either vote for or against it, because you can do that as well. So we'll ask them to vote for it. They're going to ask you to do something for them. So you can pick one of these three things. The easiest one is honestly research. If you have an option to research something, you don't even have to build the building or build whatever that it specifies. You just have to research it. And that's it. And that makes it very easy to satisfy their demands. And then you can see that now 81 delegates are in support, which will result in a guaranteed passage of the law. So then I'll show you the votes. And you can see mass-produced goods, 51 required. Like I said, for rule laws, you need 67.
The delegates have spoken.
Alright. And then you can see mass-produced goods. And you can now see that our goods efficiency has gone up. We are now producing more goods in the same amount of space. And like I mentioned with the research, the more you have, the faster it goes. Alright, the next segment we are going to talk about is trust, tension, factions, relations, fervor, and radicalization. So first off, there is the trust bar down here in the lower middle. You can see that currently I am accepted overall. And the different factions have either greater or lesser influence depending on their population size in the city. So you'll definitely want to keep this in mind. And the factions that view you more favorably and are larger will have a greater influence on this. And you can also see that some of them have varying worldviews. It's like the New Londoners with progress, the Stalwarts, progress, merit, and reason, the Pilgrims, adaptation, equality, and tradition, and the Frostlanders with adaptation. Decisions that you make throughout the game, either through laws, buildings, research, etc., can affect the way the factions view you, depending on what they think of your actions. Alright, and then there's tension. That's this little sphere in the middle. This can result in violence if it gets too high. You need to be careful with this. It goes from absent to catastrophic, and this can be influenced by basically everything in the game. From the laws that you pass, to the way people view you, to the squalor, and like the general city conditions. There's tons of things that can influence this, and you can see what is influencing it to see if you can do anything about it. Sometimes there's stuff you can do about it, and sometimes there isn't. It kind of depends. Now, if a faction becomes devoted to you, none of mine currently are, but if they do, they provide other bonuses because they can hold rallies in your housing districts. They can do things like increase your available workforce, increase your heat stamp production, and depending on which faction it is, they can do other bonuses, such as with the Stalwarts providing more guards, the Faith Keepers providing additional trust, so they can help bring your trust back up with evening prayers, and the people like the Pilgrims will give you greater scout exploration speed. So that's really good, and the longer you are devoted, the more bonuses you'll get. And sometimes, depending on the situation, a faction may become radicalized, depending on the game's situation and the decisions that you make. They can start to behave a bit irrationally, and there are certain laws in the idea tree, or certain things in the idea tree, rather, that you may notice as you go about. We can't see anything yet, but they will have red text. So like here, you can see, so there's a little bit. This is like an extreme view. So one of the groups, if they are radicalized through the game, they may suggest something that may not be favorable to a large group of the population. You can research and like pass these and things like that, but you'll definitely want to be careful when you do, because these are going to more dramatically affect your relationships with the other groups. So just something to bear in mind. And there's another one here, under the city area. Alright, the last major topic we are going to discuss is exploration, outposts, and settlements. So to start exploring Frostland, you must build a logistics district on an old wayfinding station somewhere around New London. There are 3 of these, represented by compass icons on the map. So you can have up to 3 logistics districts at the same time, and they can be expanded, which allows you to increase the number of Frostland teams that can be sent out. And once you do this, you can go to Frostland, and you can see there's the area around you. I've explored a little bit just to be able to illustrate. So when you start clicking on areas, you can see what the threat level is. You can see whether it's deadly, dangerous, or safe, with deadly obviously having the potential to result in deaths from your scouting teams. Like the game says here, you can build any scout's headquarters or pass the Pathfinder Scouts Law. This can decrease the threat level. And you can see what possible findings you can get there. And you can also see how many Frostland teams are required, because you don't always need the same amount. And then you can also see how long it's going to take to chart that area. So you can take a look here, you can launch it, and then you can also look at some of these other places, like you can find other, like, Frostlanders to come back. You can find resources and create outposts there. In order to do this, you must create a trail that connects the outpost to the city. And it will take some time to create it, but then you can move resources or other bonuses to your main hub. For each segment, it takes 1 week and a bunch of resources. But then with this coal mine, I can send coal back to New London to improve my heat supply. While you're out here, your first objective is actually to find a permanent fuel source, because your coal supply is only so finite. So you'll want to head over to the Desolate Coast. You'll have to go to the Frozen Bay first, so there's kind of a bit of a trail that you have to follow. But then you can go here. So we're going to let that run for a minute. Head back to the city. And like I said, you can reduce the threat level by certain laws, research, and buildings. Sometimes some of the outposts require additional resources like materials, coal, or oil to run, but they usually have a pretty significant bonus. There are also 2 areas on the map that can create settlements, which are effectively 2nd and 3rd cities. But you also need to manage workforce and then hunger, disease, cold, squalor, and crime in those other areas. And you can also trade resources between your settlements as well. And there's another feature you can use called the Skyway, which will allow shipping of an even greater quantity of resources than a trail. Because the trail only allows 250, the Skyway allows 600. So that can actually be a pretty significant boost. So we're actually going to go ahead and do that on the coal outpost, because then it can send more and further increase our supply. We will come back shortly once I've gotten to the first settlement area. Alright, as part 2 of the segment on exploration, outposts, and settlements, we're going to take a look at the Old Dreadnought. This is your main objective once you reach Chapter 1. You want to find this, and then you'll be able to send colonists to that area to harvest the oil. Some of you may recognize this as being the same thing as in the prologue. This is technically where you start. And you can pick either of those, it really doesn't matter. And then you can connect it to the main city by a trail. And once you do that, you'll be able to start transferring resources and sending colonists to that area. Alright, well, this concludes the initial guide to Frostpunk 2. If any of you have any questions about anything in here, or there's anything that is unclear, please let me know in the comments below. I will gladly attempt to answer those questions as best as I can. I'm still learning the mechanics myself, but felt that I had a good understanding to be able to share some knowledge with you guys. Catch you next time.